Now we have come to our first panel, Unifying Governance in Post-War Yemen. This panel is organized by the Gulf International Forum, and the discussion will be moderated by Ambassador Patrick Theros. Ambassador Theros is the strategic advisor for the Gulf International Forum in a career spanning for almost 63 years. He also served in diplomatic positions ranging from Beirut to Abu Dhabi, as well as the Department of State. During that period, he earned 4 Superior Honor Awards. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our next moderator, Ambassador Patrick Theros. Ambassador.
Thank you all very much for coming today this early. I would want to begin by saying that one sentence that Ambassador Hadrami said, Yemenis deserve better than this. They do. I have had Yemeni friends going back for the whole of my 63-year career, and they do deserve better. Let me confess to a certain amount of stage fright. This is the first time in 3 years that I've actually moderated a panel in real life. It is the first time that I've moderated a panel that most of the participants will be on the screens rather than the chairs next to me. So if I muck it up a little bit, please bear with me, because I've not done this before. The question today that we will be discussing in this panel is what sort of unity, how does unity affect the potential for peace in Yemen? Will the drive for unity exacerbate the potential for peace? Will the truce, in fact, if the Yemenis can find some way to bring people together into the government, actually help the peace process? I want to particularly thank the Washington Center for Yemen Studies, because they are doing something that is not done enough, which we at the Gulf International Forum applaud. Bring the voices of the region here. There are far too many panels, far too many discussions in the United States today in Washington about the future of countries like Yemen, in which all the discussion is done by people who look like me. It should be done with the voices of the region. So, and I also don't want to go too long, because this is a long panel and we are somewhat short of time. The UN envoy, Hans Grunberg, to Yemen has yesterday expressed great concern that the truce could fall apart and the war would start again. This need not happen, this should not happen. But there are many, many obstacles. The first obstacle that I have noted is that the areas of control in Yemen are actually 4 different places. There is a very significant part of within the boundaries of Yemen that is controlled by the government of Yemen under the Presidential Leadership Council. In the north, an equally large area controlled by the Houthis. Then in the south, the Southern Transitional Council, which is a member but is perhaps not an enthusiastic member of the Presidential Leadership Council, and last area, different areas controlled by Islamist organizations. These are all complex issues, and we have assembled a panel today. I won't go into great details about who they are. You all have had access to their biographies, but our first, who can discuss this issue and will let us draw some conclusions and hopefully some lessons as to how to proceed. Our first speaker is Her Excellency Ms. Amat Al-Amin, who is a truly distinguished person. Had great pleasure to meet her, the first Yemeni ambassador, the first woman ambassador, excuse me, Managing Director of Yemen's Executive Bureau for the Acceleration of Aid Absorption, and a minister for human rights in the Yemeni government. Truly a remarkable person, and it's a great honor to be here with her today. Please. please, I'm having a little bit of an issue with my. Thank you very much.
Thank you. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، وكل عام والجميع بخير بمناسبة أعياد ثورتي 26 سبتمبر و14 أكتوبر المجيدة. My message to all of us here concerned about the future of Yemen and Yemen's civilian population is simple. The disastrous situation in Yemen cannot be resolved militarily. The past 7 years provide ample evidence of this proposition. As we begin today, I would highlight what is perhaps the most urgent of Yemen's current crises: food security and the immediate threat of famine. 2/3 of Yemen's population is food insecure. Yemen continues to have some of the worst rates of acute malnutrition in the world, affecting 2.2 million children under the age of 5 and 1.3 million pregnant or nursing mothers. Malnutrition and famine directly affect not only the current civilian population, but as we know, the very future of Yemen itself. Despite some progress towards achieving the target of stunting, still 46.6% of children under 5 years of age are still affected, which is higher than the average of Asia region. UN reports indicates that more than 2,900 schools in Yemen have been either destroyed or damaged or used for non-educational purposes. This year, 2 million children are out of schools, according to UNICEF. 2/3 of teaching workforce, over 170,000 teachers, have not received regular salaries for 5 years at least. Our future prosperity requires a healthy and well-educated population of children and youth. In addition to addressing food security, it is urgent that the wartime damage of Yemen's human and physical education and health infrastructure must be repaired. Solving these problems is within our reach. First, there must be a substantial extension of the truce. The most contentious issues facing Yemen, which is the allocation of power, wealth, and reform of the constitutional structure of the state, we know it will take time, courage, creativity, and sincerity on the part of the parties to the conflict. Addressing the current suffering and future well-being of Yemen's population must not be postponed till major political issues are going to be resolved. Resolving the crisis of food security and other elements of the humanitarian crisis can and must be addressed quickly. Those who are under the control by Ansar Allah or those controlled by the Yemen government, they are all suffering immensely. Agreement on technical measures between the Presidential Leadership Council and Ansar Allah authorities can begin to bring relief now. Special Envoy Grunberg, who is speaking all the time about the necessity of stopping this tragedy, has convened a meeting on last May where he concluded the following: that there are possibilities of achieving those important steps in order to set the ground for the continuation of talking towards achieving peace. First of them, currency exchange rate stabilization across Yemen. These are all amongst the included steps agreed upon by different technical teams representing both the government of Yemen and the Houthis. In addition, appropriate use of public revenues, the financing of public service salaries, ending restrictions on freedom of movement and double taxation, joint planning for post-conflict reconstruction, and challenges faced by the private sector, especially the urgent need to support the Yemeni commercial banking sector and its ability to engage internationally and support trade. We must also face and resolve Yemen's severe gender gap. Yemen ranks 142 out of 142 countries in the 2014 Global Gender Gap Index. This issue must be addressed in all stages and forums of the peace-building process. UNCR 2216, which was issued in April 2nd, 2015, includes a very tiny reference to the National Dialogue Conference outcome with a clear agreement on the role of women going forward, but nothing after that. This has to start with the government's commitment to women's rights as full citizens. The women's participation in the NDC has not, unfortunately, been followed by further, more important steps. As I have noted, the disastrous situation in Yemen cannot be resolved militarily. It requires inter-Yemeni dialogue and agreement, and this dialogue must not be limited to a national level. Peace building and economic recovery should also be taking place at local levels and subsequently expand into larger areas. These local initiatives, often identified and maintained by youth, women, and tribal and social leaders, peace builders, can be greatly facilitated. Yemen has centuries of experience in food production, including the important role of women in the process, increasing livestock in rural areas where there is still sufficient natural vegetation will also improve food security. It is also essential to revitalize the local fishing industry along the very long coasts of Yemen. This has been greatly, unfortunately, diminished by the war and also by the economic restrictions. We must begin now to agree that resort to more armed conflict and more war in Yemen's civilian population will benefit no one in Yemen or in the region. Then we can turn our attention to Yemen's future and to the hard work of recovery and rebuilding by Yemenis. I thank you very much, and I wanted to speak only on those general terms, then we'll answer any question. Thank you.
That was certainly a very sobering setting of the stage for the problems that face Yemen and for how a solution should be found. Those are very difficult questions, and I'm not sure how we're going to go about answering them either today or in the future. In the question of my stage fright, I forgot to ask something of the organizers. How will we handle questions at the end of this? There will be little cards? Okay, thank you. I didn't know. Our second speaker is Dr. Bakr Al-Qirbi. He was a former Yemeni Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is the longest-serving Foreign Minister of Yemen, and given the difficulties of that job, one wonders why he continued to do that all that time. He is, like many others, a doctor, dean of the medical school, and was appointed Minister of Yemeni Minister of Education, background in medicine. And I won't go on any further. Dr. Al-Qirbi, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, and good day for those in Washington and beyond. And after the sobering speeches by His Excellency, the ex-Foreign Minister and now Ambassador to the United States of Hadrami, and to Sister Amat Al-Alim, Alsoswa, for their sobering remarks. I may be not as sober as they are, but I think it is important to raise some of the important issues for the future of Yemen. I'm glad that I'm working with a panel of whom I knew, who are all friends. And I'm glad that Ambassador Tueller is with us here, who lived the period of 2+ months in Kuwait when we were negotiating for a political settlement at the moment. And the challenges that we faced between those who believed in the military solution and those who believed in the peaceful solution, political solution. Fortunately, I think now nobody will question this, that there is no alternative but for a political solution. The recent developments in Yemen and positions of the various parties of the conflicts may create an opportunity for a new momentum for peace. But there are some concerning issues in all these elements or these factors. I think what's important now is to insist that we are working to save Yemen from a very disastrous situation and very unpredictable future if things continue the way they are at the moment. The issues that I want to raise today with you regarding the future of a political solution, one is the issue of the ceasefire. I think if you question anybody in Yemen about the ceasefire, they are happy that there is a ceasefire because it certainly reduced the tensions and the suffering. But it did not provide really a solution or deliver the promises of starting the political negotiations for a political settlement. And what worries many Yemenis, including myself, is that the ceasefire process is going to continue the track of the Stockholm Agreement, of having to defend the continuity of an agreement that has not produced results. Now, I think what's important, hopefully, if the United States, Oman, and Special Envoy, and he is today in Sana'a, if they can save the day and agree on an extension. But an extension, I hope, with very clear terms as what's going to happen during this period of ceasefire. Just to continue with the ceasefire without an end for its objectives and a clear roadmap for what's to be done. And especially, I think, most important, the initiation of the political negotiation for a settlement. So let us hope that the ceasefire will survive in the next 24 or 36 hours. The second issue, I think, which is extremely important, and it really affects not only the unity of the country, but the future of the country. And that is the issue of the PLC. Is the PLC going really to deliver the hopes on which it was created? There is a lot of misgivings on the creation of the PLC, the way it has been created. But irrespective of that, we've heard His Excellency Ambassador Hadrami saying that it has to be supported. But I think it has to be supported with a very clear mandate as to its responsibility and how it can be unified to achieve an objective that will really deliver peace, as has been clearly stated in the declaration of its establishment, and how it will become an element really in which not only the leaderships of the militias make the decision on these issues of political settlement, but also the political parties are involved in the process. Because that's, as it seems now, the de facto military groups are now taking control of the resolution of the conflict and the future of Yemen. They must have a role, but I think the political parties have to be involved and have a hand in defining the future of Yemen. So the PLC has a lot of challenges. For one of them, establishing its constitutionality. Second is really its mandate. The third, delivering to the people that they can work for the interests of the Yemeni people in the future of Yemen. The third issue, I think, which is has to be taken into consideration in the resolution of the conflict, and I think many people have repeatedly said that the solution of the conflict is not completely in the hands of the Yemenis. We repeatedly say Yemeni solution, but we know that the Yemeni solution is influenced by the sponsors of the various groups of the conflicts in Yemen. And that unless they back, first of all, a Yemeni solution, that they withdraw their influence and pressure on the Yemenis, that the attainability of an acceptable and just solution may not be realized. So I think one needs to rethink the position of sponsors of the peace process, whether it is the United States of America, UK, Oman, and the other players with the coalition. I think it is time now to ponder on innovative solutions for this conflict and to avoid the old process of game playing, of blaming each other for the mistakes. I think it is time now to look at the future for Yemen and to abandon our old hostilities and uncertainties about each other. Another challenge I think Yemen faces and those who are looking for this process is the position of Ansarullah. This is a challenge we face in Kuwait, but I think now maybe it is time for them to realize that nobody in Yemen can survive and control Yemen without having the Yemeni people accepting their role and their responsibility in leadership. But it also requires a new mentality of dealing with them as to how to initiate them, how to induce them to come to the negotiating table. The unity of Yemen as a final issue that I have to talk about. I think governance and the unity of the government are very important issues for the success of any post-war Yemen. There is no question of on this matter in my mind. To achieve this, I think, is to ensure how the post-conflict government is created on a unified basis, unity basis. Not unity of the country, but the unity of the political parties and the conflict parties. Because unless they all agree to take responsibility for the post-conflict reconstruction of Yemen and resolving the areas of sensitivity, whether it is the southern issue or Saudi issues, we will remain in the tangle of continuing conflict between us. This is the responsibility of the sponsors, who have to understand that the durability of any political solution will be based on its justice to all parties and acceptability to all parties. And this is, I think, where the wisdom will prevail if we pursue these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Qirbi. I'm going to abuse my position a bit as moderator by asking you one question before we proceed to the next speaker. Realistically, there is no military solution. Realistically, the idea that one side can win is simply not possible. Do you believe that the important factions, whether the Houthis, the Presidential Leadership Council, or anyone else, have yet formulated in their minds a concept of what they could live with, of what they could accept, or are they determined to break the state up?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I'm sure if you ask Ansarullah, they will accuse the other side of being obstructive and unlikely to accept a political solution. If you ask the government side, they will accuse Ansarullah of the same thing. So I think we have to assume, in order for us to proceed, that both of them are willing to proceed with the process of a political solution. This is the challenge of the mediator and the sponsors on how they can get the two sides to the negotiating table. I'm sure Ambassador Tueller, with his experience in Kuwait, can throw probably some ideas at the conference on how this can be done, because we faced this problem in Kuwait at the time of how to get the two sides really to agree to meet face to face, how to negotiate the issues directly rather than through other third parties.
Thank you. It gives me a great personal pleasure to introduce our third speaker, His Excellency, His Honorable, the Ambassador Matthew Tueller, a much younger old friend of mine than mine. He has had the misfortune of having served with me at least 2 or 3 times in different positions of the Foreign Service, and was, I remember then, one of the brightest people I'd ever known, and he continues to be one of the brightest people I've ever known. Ambassador Tueller will speak to the other parties, the non-Yemeni parties as well, where they are going, what they expect, and what might happen. Matt?
Well, thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you to the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies for this invitation. And it's particularly gratifying to me and encouraging to join with these Yemeni participants who I regard as great friends, but also have a deep admiration for, and it underpins what has always been where I have had a sense of optimism about Yemen, is that there are Yemenis who have not only the capabilities and the skills, but of course the commitment, the patriotism to continue to work at what we all recognize are very, very difficult problems. I have to begin, of course, with a disclaimer that I am a former U.S. government official, and I can't pretend to speak for the U.S. government. But of course, with the experience working closely with various UN envoys, 3 UN envoys that I worked with, and through the process in Kuwait and Stockholm and elsewhere, I think I can say a few things about where the U.S. strategic interests lie, both in terms of Yemen as a vital country in the region, but also, of course, the larger and very complex problem of the U.S. interest in regional stability, which play out in a way in Yemen that certainly, at least since the events of 2011, have largely had a negative impact on broader U.S. interest in seeing strong nation states, networks of stable ties amongst those states. First of all, of course, in Yemen, and I think this holds true across various administrations, Democratic, Republican change, that there is in fact an abiding U.S. interest in seeing Yemen as a unified state and as a stable state with strong state institutions. And of course, the interest that the U.S. sees at stake in this, that Yemen continues to be an area in which there are the potential for violent extremist groups, and particularly Al-Qaeda in Yemen is still the franchise of Al-Qaeda that perhaps is the most dangerous and the most committed to continuing to internationalize the Al-Qaeda and conduct attacks internationally. So to have strong state institutions that can prevent the propagation of violent extremist groups. Of course, there's also a strong U.S. interest because of the important geographic location in Yemen in ensuring that the Bab al-Mandeb and those significant waterways through which a great portion of U.S. and world commercial trade passes are policed, are secure, are stable, and not affected by internal conflicts. And then, of course, I have to say quite clearly that there is a U.S. interest in preventing the ongoing humanitarian crisis. And most often that's what you see discussed in the media or in Congress when it comes to Yemen. And these are, we all recognize, acute and difficult problems. And in fact, the deterioration of all of the indicators of human potential in Yemen have grown drastically worse over the 8 years of the conflict. But I'm often discouraged by the superficiality of the discussion that takes place on the humanitarian conflict. It's very simplistic to say that, of course, the Saudi intervention in the conflict and the ongoing Saudi boycott of the airports and the ports and so on has caused the humanitarian crisis. And while it certainly has contributed to it, I think everybody here knows that the various complexities that underlie the humanitarian crisis are far greater than that, and can only really be resolved in the long term by building up a strong state and institutions of the state. For all of those various reasons, the U.S. continues to be committed to the process that began after the overthrow of the former regime in the National Dialogue Conference, the GCC initiative, because those all were aimed at rebuilding state institutions and creating consensus for strong institutions and for building a unified state. And of course, all of those things have to be defined and led by Yemenis, but the United States does continue to see that post-war there should be a stable, unified Yemen with ties to all of its regional neighbors, and with the ability to protect Yemeni interest in ways that will serve U.S. broader interests. The really difficult issues, and Dr. Qirbi and others have alluded to this, of course, is that the regional context of this conflict in Yemen is so complex and deeply rooted, not only in the rivalry between the GCC and Iran, but in fact, broader regional efforts led by Iran to try to diminish or counter the U.S. role and presence in the region. And the Iranians saw an opportunity in Yemen and in the chaos that ensued after the overthrow of the former regime to expand at very low cost an ability to try to create a dynamic that would thwart what they see as Saudi, U.S., other ambitions to, and it's always been very chilling to me as I remind myself of perhaps an unscripted but telling remark by an Iranian parliamentarian after the Houthi takeover in Sana'a, boasting that Iran and the Iranian Revolution now controlled 4 Arab capitals, meaning, of course, Sana'a, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. And it's that dynamic which is ongoing and still very, very deeply rooted that really is, I think, most dangerous to U.S. interest in the region. And it's very, very hard to see that U.S. interests could be served by any outcome to the conflict that allows Iran a continuing role in the outcome of post-war Yemen. That much like a divided Yemen will also simply sow the seeds for protracted and further conflict, with the potential for all of those humanitarian, security, and political implications that work against U.S. interest. Iran's role, of course, is opportunistic. There are very deep ties that go with Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, back much farther. But I think that there's also complexities there that should be worked and explored to see if there's a way to reduce Iran's influence and its role that it plays. Because I think as long as Iran continues to have a hand in the political outcome in Yemen, we will not see a political resolution. I agree with all of those who say that there is no military solution to the conflict, but only in the very narrow sense that no side in Yemen, internal or regional, is going to be able to impose its will on an outcome by military means. However, the question that we all really confront is there in fact a political solution? Is there a way to resolve these deep-seated internal problems, particularly in the context of the regional dynamics? Patience is going to be required, and I think we don't give up hope. What I saw that in Kuwait and in Stockholm and on other occasions in Geneva, when we were able to bring the parties together, that a certain dynamic can and does take place when Yemenis sit down amongst themselves. And to create opportunities for that to continue to happen, I think, is the ongoing effort led by Tim Lenderking, by our embassy in exile in Riyadh and elsewhere. And I believe that that will be an ongoing commitment on the part of the U.S. to support UN efforts, regional efforts, and others to resolve these political problems. But the shape of that resolution and whether there in fact right now is yet a path towards that political solution, is a question that I don't think I can answer in the affirmative at this time. But again, I look forward to questions and further discussion on these very difficult issues. And back to you, Patrick.
Matt, thank you very much. Right at the end, a question occurred to me that clearly the United States needs a Yemeni solution to Yemen's problem. In your opinion, are there solutions that the United States, for its own policy requirements, might find unacceptable? And I'm talking about feasible solutions that are within the range of possibility.
Well, I think any solution that leaves in place enmity or between Yemen and its most important Arab partners would not be something that the U.S. Would want to get behind. At the end of the day, and again in the regional context, and of course there's a long history of difficult relations between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And I often thought, and Patrick, you were there at the creation of the GCC, that in many ways the GCC made a very, very strategic miscalculation by excluding Yemen, the other country on the Arabian Peninsula, from the network that it was attempting to build to create a security, political, economic structures on the Arabian Peninsula. I think where I have seen that through these various permutations, where there's been opportunities that you can see for Yemen to improve its ties with the GCC and somehow become integrated on the Arabian Peninsula into the political, economic, and security things, that's not only in the U.S. interest, but in fact, I think is one of the things that Yemen has going with it. Unlike some of the other failed states that we're trying to pull back into functionality or to push back the opportunistic efforts of Iran, the fact is that the GCC as an institution has the wherewithal to help Yemen build those strong institutions. And I would like to see that ultimately a political solution strengthens those ties between Yemen and its partners on the Arabian Peninsula. Over.
Thank you. You raise a really interesting issue. Had Yemen been included or associated with the Gulf Cooperation Council from the beginning, would we be having a completely different conversation today? If I could ask a quick question to the organizers, in the interest of time, if we could begin to collect some of the cards from now. I read slowly and with reading glasses, so if we could begin to collect some of the cards now. Our fourth and final speaker, Mr. Abdulghani Al-Iryani, a senior researcher at the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies. He focuses on the peace process, conflict analysis, and transformation of the Yemeni state. And he will speak to us today on what sort of solution may come out of any sort of peace process. Mr. Iryani.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The organizers have assigned me the thankless task of answering whether a divided Yemen, a federal Yemen, or a unitary Yemen would be viable after 7 years of conflict. And to answer that question, we need to go back a little to recent history. In the mid-2000s, Yemeni state viability was already in question. A decade after the 1994 civil war, the political developments and democratization that took place upon unification had been reversed. And the power pyramid had become too steep, with a small tribe and its allies on top, and the rest marginalized and alienated. The trajectory of regime failure by that time was already discernible. Power concentration and corruption had also frustrated economic growth at that time and dried up investment. Non-oil investment fell to next to nothing, and major international oil companies had given up on Yemen. The trajectory of economic collapse was also clearly discernible. The Yemeni state was suffering from an accelerating process of decay. Without deep political and economic reforms, state failure, in our view at that time, was not a question of if, but a question of when. Unfortunately, the reforms never came. That was then. How about now? According to a recent UNDP report, the war has by now reversed 3 decades of development. It was said earlier 2 decades, but in fact, it is already closer to 3 decades and has cost approximately $100 billion. We also know that on the political side, the war has divided Yemenis along identity and geographical fault lines to an unprecedented degree. So if maintaining state viability was in question in the good old days of state decay, consider the challenge we face now in these times of state disintegration. The picture is grim, but not all is lost. There is still a path to restore the Yemeni state to political and economic viability. But we must make the right choices based on collective recognition of a few basic principles. The first principle is a state is not a flag or an army or a declaration of independence. The state is a long historical process of institution building. The Yemeni state institutions, weak and underdeveloped as they are, have been built over at least 2 centuries. To think that parts of Yemen can turn into a viable state overnight with functioning institutions is both naive and reckless. If we lose what is left of the Yemeni state, it will take generations of instability to restore it or build several states in its place. So, what is left of the Yemeni state? 3 components of the Yemeni state still exist. A, the central institutions in Sana'a, that, despite the distortions caused by Ansar Allah in the past 7 years, are still functioning, and more importantly, are still national in nature. The personnel, the practices, the laws that govern them are all national. Those institutions can be reunified. And I must say that when the internationally recognized government acts as if these institutions belong to Ansar Allah and try to weaken them and build its own institutions, it is harming the chances of restoring the Yemeni state. The second component is the institutions of local government. They are among the least divided state institutions in Yemen, especially in places like Hadramaut or Adan or Sana'a itself and the surrounding governorates. Building the capacity of local governments and formalizing the competencies they now practice in an ad hoc basis will improve the chances of restoring the Yemeni state. The third component that we must not lose is the international recognition of the Yemeni state. For having a seat in the General Assembly of the UN and the international consensus on maintaining the unity and territorial integrity of the Yemeni state has been the insurance policy that throughout this war has prevented regional intrigue from breaking Yemen apart. Building on these 3 remaining components of the Yemeni state is the only way to restore it. A second principle that we must reach collective recognition of is that the principle, the habit of repeating the same old mistakes and expecting a different result is in fact the textbook definition of stupidity. We got to this sad state of war and disintegration primarily because of the following. A, power concentration and the marginalization of most Yemenis, especially the South. B, over-centralization and reversing past attempts of building the capacity of local government. C, reliance on rent income and ignoring economic development at the local level. And D, costly over-militarization. A quick analysis that I've made recently of the 2014 budget shows that, and 2014 budget is typical for the 2 decades prior, shows that at least 2/3 of the government own revenue went to the security sector, mainly for regime maintenance. Development and service delivery were largely funded by donors. These strategies and policies need to be reversed and avoided. We must agree on deep political, fiscal, and given the number of armed groups that we have to deal with, even security sector decentralization are necessary. Local autonomy at the governorate level is now a prerequisite to restoring the Yemeni state. The third principle is that if we do not agree on the form of the post-war state and make the basic outline of the state structure a part of the ceasefire agreement, we will be signing the death certificate of the Yemeni state. Armed groups are now in control of revenue streams that they will not surrender. They will do all they can to obstruct an agreement on power and wealth sharing after the war, leading to years of fruitless negotiations while the process of state disintegration goes on to the end. We still have a chance if we do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have been receiving questions, which you actually answered a couple of them before I even had a chance to read them. But one question that came to my mind, it is implied in several of the questions that I have received, the external factor. The Yemenis have to find a peace solution to make it stick. If the Yemenis don't make it stick, it won't work in the long run. However, there are several external parties that are able to influence or derail the peace process rather easily. The United States, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and of course, Iran. And there may be some other regional parties as well. For any of the participants, is there value in trying to find consensus among the external powers before or in the process of seeking a Yemeni solution to the civil war? And if so, what is the vehicle for trying to do that? Anybody have any, wave a hand, I can't see it very clearly, if you would like to answer that question. Sorry? No, sorry, Dr. Qirbi?
I think it's going to be impossible to reach a consensus between the various regional powers involved in the conflict of Yemen. But they have to be involved in the process of evolving the political solution for Yemen, because they have their own interests, and the solution has to safeguard their interests, especially Saudi Arabia in particular, who has direct borders with Yemen and will be affected by any instability of Yemen. So I think they should share really in the development of a political solution, of the terms of the political solution, of the guarantees that are necessary for Yemen and for the regional powers or neighbors of Yemen. Because without that, I think there will be always concerns that may influence the results of any Yemeni solution. Thank you.
Any other volunteers? All right. The variation on that question is who among the external powers is best able to influence movement towards a peace process? I'm having some. Sorry. Oh, I didn't. Yeah, like I say, I've got to get used to this new format. Who amongst the external powers is most likely to be able to influence a peace process in a positive way? Is it the United States? Is it the United Nations? Is it can Iran be brought along? Any question? I can't really tell unless someone is interested in answering the question. Okay.
I may volunteer an answer.
Sorry?
I will volunteer an answer.
Okay, thank you.
Iran needs to be included, but as Dr. Qirbi said, it's impossible to reach consensus with Iran. However, Iran knows well that the instrument of its leverage in Yemen has been weapons and training, and that works during the time of war. But when the war is over, the instrument for leverage, that is development funding and reconstruction, is not available to Iran. So Iran is, in my view, ready to make a deal on Yemen as the war approaches an end.
I'm told we are basically running out of time, so there's a whole bunch of really very, very good questions here. What would be and let me finish with this one. It's going to be difficult to pick all these really good questions here. Is the other the other parties to the dispute, people in the South, the Presidential Council, and so forth, seem to have themselves more or less on the same script, with some big reactions. The Houthis are clearly not on the script so far. What is the best way, in your opinion, to get the Houthis on the script? And that, I'm afraid, is most important question, and I'm afraid the last one as well. Is it military pressure? Is it persuading Iran? Or is there some other way to get the Houthis on the script?
If nobody is going to talk, then I will.
Okay, thank you.
Military pressure is usually mentioned by most people, but I think it's gravely mistaken. The Houthis need to they need to lose the instruments that made it possible for them to control the population and recruit them for war. These instruments were provided by the coalition. The sanctions, the flight restrictions, the aerial bombing, all of that helped the Houthis become the power that they are now. I think easing the restrictions on the population will strengthen the population and force the Houthis to begin to listen to the demands for an end to the war. And it will strengthen the moderates and weaken the militants who would like to continue fighting forever. Over.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask each of the participants in the order in which you started, if you could wrap up, where are we going? What are particularly related to the subjects you discussed? Amat, for example, we have a major humanitarian crisis in Yemen. We have said this over and over again. Is it progressively getting worse? And are there ways to, things that can be done in the course of the peace process that might help this?
May I use microphone? Thank you very much. Going to answer, first of all, allow me to also add my 2 cents to what all the wonderful speakers have said about this. But it's important to remind ourselves that the humanitarian crisis was not only the product of the current conflict. Yemen has unfortunately started getting into these very troubling waters for some time, actually for some decades ago. And that goes back again to the issue of the good governance, to the issues of the functions of the states, the question of citizenship and the implementation of the rule of law. As Yemen also has suffered for a long time the issues of poverty, which has continuously become like a normal thing, that you would talk every year about the reduction of the level of the economic growth, and then there was no much done, if you will, in terms of achieving justices, on also solving the issues of corruption, which has become also a very difficult issue for the entire, well, actually for different, actually even governments. And in addition to that, of course, we have seen, starting from the year of 2006 and going down to 2010 and 2011, I mean, all these issues were adding to the difficult issues, including the economic development, including the level of standard of living. And that's why Yemen has been going from bad to worse position when it comes to all these indicators. And again, it's also related to the whole focus and the spending on also just the military, the security forces, and of course, not to forget the issue of fighting terrorism and all of it. So we have had in the past few decades, actually, the reasons and the issues related to the current situation meaning the time prior to 2011 uprising. And from there, it's important to continue to remember that also Yemen has become so much dependent on external donations, on external support. And there was hardly serious, really, look inside Yemen, and it's very also powerful, and it's also reasons to become at least food, not necessarily secured, but not to become, as we are seeing it today, really suffering from almost getting into a famine. And I think this is also where we have to think when we talk about the future. We must start by alleviating this level really of conditions, which has become, as we saw, as a reason again of the political and other social and economic factors for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Al-Qirbi. Hello, I think you have to unmute. Unmute. Can you?
Yes, I think I did. I think the challenge now for all of us really is how to move forward. And moving forward is not by really threatening the use of force and defeating the enemy, but how you can win your enemy to peace. This is the challenge, I think, facing the United States of America. Oman is playing a role in this, which can be supported and definitely used to the benefit of a political process. And more important, I think, an issue that has not been clearly defined by the various special envoys is understanding what are the concerns of the various political parties or militias, now take it into the context of the PLC, and what are the guarantees they want if there is a political solution. Because one of the obstacles for the solution in Kuwait was the disarmament issue. So we don't have to start with conditions that are going to create mistrust rather than build trust. And this is, I think, where we have to, what we have to work on now, is to really mobilize all our efforts, political, diplomatic, soft power, to force the parties to sit around the negotiating table for a political settlement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt?
Well, I think we all have, in one way or another, articulated just how difficult it is to apply pressure to the Houthis, military pressures, is not working and won't work. I think also the attempts to apply economic pressure also have simply solidified many of the ways in which they have been able to continue to obstruct a political solution. What I often saw, and in the encounters that we had at various efforts bringing the Yemeni parties together, is the Houthi movement is not monolithic. There clearly is a very, very core element that is ideological, and I think probably really irredeemable in terms of having no interest in building a normal nation state with institutions of governance. But there are many, many elements, not only within what is now come to be sort of an Ansar Allah political movement, that want to be part of state building, want to be in some ways competing for political power through the mechanisms of a political party, and working with those elements and trying to exploit those differences and separate them from the more hardened, committed, ideological elements. There are also, of course, nuances of differences within the Presidential Leadership Council and the various elements that make up that. But I think overall for the United States, for the United Nations, and I hope for the GCC and others, is to work to strengthen the position and capabilities of those elements of all of the political factions that are committed to state building and strengthening state institutions. Over.
Thank you very much. Dr. Iryani.
Thank you. I had just started my last answer describing how the Houthis became more militant and more powerful because of the sanctions and all the wrong moves by the coalition and the internationally organized government. So one first step is to just reverse those mistakes. I need to draw attention that when we say the Ansar Allah authorities in Sana'a, that's not right. The de facto authorities of Sana'a are actually a coalition between Ansar Allah and the GBC. And everybody ignores GBC as if they don't exist. Interacting with GBC and interacting with the pragmatists of Ansar Allah, removing the reasons that empower the militants against everyone else, can change the dynamic in the city and can bring the Houthis to the negotiating table. Over.
Thank you all so much. I wish to apologize to all the people who wrote some very, very interesting and incisive questions. It really is bad that we didn't have the time to address most of these questions, but thank you all for your attention and for your interest in this. And all I can do is close with the hope that we can once again in the future restore Yemen to the Arabia Felix that it once was. Thank you all very much.